Frozen without firewood. The winter survival secrets that shocked even World War II soldiers. The cold doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about strength, rank or pride. When winter really hits, it kills fast. And here's the part most people never hear. Long before power grids, before steel stoves, before supply lines and ration cards, Native Americans survived brutal winters in places where trees were rare, wood was precious, and firewood simply wasn't always there. No roaring fireplaces, no endless fuel. Yet they lived, they travelled, they raised families. And some of the techniques they mastered were so effective that modern soldiers, including those in World War II, quietly borrowed the same logic in frozen battle zones. This isn't folklore. This is cold weather warfare against nature itself. When firewood was limited, the first battlefield wasn't the land, it was the body. The smartest survival strategy was reducing how much heat you lose in the first place. Instead of relying on constant fires, native communities engineered their entire way of life around trapping warmth. Clothing wasn't decoration. It was technology. Animal skins were layered fur side in, leather out. That wasn't fashion. That was physics. Fur traps air. Air traps heat. Multiple thin layers worked better than one heavy one because they created pockets of warm air that stayed close to the skin. Even in World War II, soldiers in extreme cold learned this the hard way, when bulky coats failed, but layered systems saved lives. The principle was ancient. Control heat loss, and you control survival. Moccasins were insulated with dry grass or fur, and, they were replaced pretty often to stay moisture-free. Wet meant dead. Dry meant living another day. Head coverings were constant because, losing heat through the scalp drains the whole body. This wasn't guesswork. It was long-tested cold science, learned through generations who paid for mistakes with their lives. Without endless firewood, shelters had to do most of the work. Winter homes were built low, tight and smart. Some were partly underground, using the earth itself as insulation. Soil doesn't swing temperatures like open air. It holds steady. Even in deep winter, the ground is warmer than the wind above it. By digging in, people borrowed warmth from the planet. Walls were thick, roofs were layered, every crack was sealed. Entrances were narrow and, honestly, often designed like short tunnels to stop wind from charging straight inside. Once inside, body heat did much of the warming. A family, sleeping close, wrapped in furs, inside a sealed shelter, could raise the internal temperature dramatically without feeding a hungry fire. During World War II, similar principles showed up in snow bunkers and dugouts, where soldiers learned that insulation and structure often mattered more than fuel. You didn't need a big flame. You needed to stop the cold from stealing what you already had. When wood was scarce, other fuels stepped in. Animal fat was one of the most powerful. Rendered fat burns slowly and hot. Stone lamps filled with fat and fitted with fibre wicks provided light and controlled warmth, using a fraction of the material needed for wood. These weren't bonfires, they were precision tools. Even more important, fat wasn't only burned, it was eaten. High-fat diets were essential in winter because fat is fuel. It delivers more than double the calories of protein or carbohydrates. Every bite produced internal heat. The body became the furnace. This mirrors what military planners later understood when designing rations for cold campaigns. You don't survive winter on empty calories. You survive on dense energy. In frozen war zones, butter, oils and fatty meats became strategic resources. Native Americans had mastered that logic centuries earlier. Snow looks like death, but used right, it becomes armor. Packed snow blocks wind. Snow piled against shelters increases insulation. Even a shallow snow cover around a home stabilizes interior temperatures. Snow shelters and wind walls reduced heat loss dramatically. Inside, temperatures could remain far above the outside air even when no active fire burned. Inside sleeping areas, raised platforms kept bodies off frozen ground. Thick bedding of hides and grasses prevented conductive heat loss. This is critical. Cold kills faster from below than above. The earth drains warmth relentlessly. Elevation and insulation broke that drain. WWII troops in Arctic zones learned the same thing through painful trial. You don't sleep on ice. You build above it. You layer under you more than over you. Native survival systems already knew. Survival wasn't only about staying still. It was about moving without dying. In extreme cold, sweat is an enemy. Moisture steals heat. So winter travel was steady, controlled and deliberate. Clothing systems allowed layers to be opened or closed to regulate heat. People learned to work just below the sweat point. Snowshoes spread weight, preventing exhaustion. Efficient movement conserved calories and heat. Wind was avoided. Natural barriers were used. Travel routes followed terrain that cut exposure. In wartime winters, armies that ignored these principles lost more soldiers to cold than to bullets. Frostbite, trench foot and hypothermia crippled units that didn't respect what cold really does. Native methods were the opposite of reckless endurance. They were calculated restraint. One of the strongest survival tools wasn't physical, it was social. People lived close, slept close, worked in groups, shared food, shared shelter, shared warmth. Isolation in winter meant death. Togetherness multiplied heat, labor, and resilience. Tasks were divided so no one wasted energy. Food was pooled. The weak were protected because losing a person meant losing future labor. This collective logic is identical to how winter war camps functioned. Units survived when they operated as one body. When they didn't, cold took them apart. Because winter has always been a weapon, in history, in war, in survival. These methods weren't primitive, they were optimized. They show us that technology isn't only steel and engines. Sometimes it's fur, earth, fat, and discipline. Native Americans didn't conquer winter by overpowering it. They outthought it. They reduced loss. They increased efficiency. They designed life itself around thermal control. And long after, modern militaries followed the same path, often rediscovering what had already been proven. Cold kills quietly. These people learned to silence it first. If this kind of deep survival history fires you up, make sure you subscribe to Life in Wartime WWII. Share this with someone who loves real-world tactics and stay locked in. Because the past still teaches, and some lessons can still save lives.